Today we're looking at Egypt. Just a few days after last Wednesday, the Egyptian armed forces deposed the Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi, suspending the country's constitution. First blood has been spilled. About 50 people have been killed and hundreds wounded in clashes between Mr. Morsi's supporters and opponents across the whole of the country. So, where could the military take Egypt? And do we need to expect a ripple effect? And these are the questions we're discussing with our guest speakers, Dr. Omar Ashur, the Director of Middle East Studies at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter,
Mona Makram Abeid, a senator who has just resigned and professor of political science at the American University in Cairo,
Dr. David Bukai, professor of political science at the University of Haifa,
and Professor Dr. Henna Fertig, acting vice president of the Giga Institute of Middle East Studies in Hamburg.
Egypt is on the verge of a civil war, and that's what Russian President Vladimir Putin has been quoted as saying. Syria is already engulfed in a civil war, and no matter how sad it might sound, Egypt is also moving in the same direction. It would be good if the Egyptian people avoided this fate. That's what he told the Russian information agency during his working visit to Kazakhstan. At this very moment, the military are resorting to force. That was quite expectable. On the other hand, this is a really tragic development because it looks like the blood is bound to bring on more blood and violence is bound to bring on more violence. But I suggest that for starters, we could actually listen to our guest speaker, Mona Makram Abeid, a senator who has just resigned and a professor of political science at the American University in Cairo.
First of all, about what happened this morning, which is quite tragic, and we condemn all sorts of violence. There are, until now, very conflicting reports between both the army and the Muslim Brotherhood. But I believe that if violence continues between the pro- and anti-Morsi demonstrators, the army may see no choice but to impose martial law. Until now, there is no curfew in Egypt. But if this kind of violence continues and grows worse, the Egyptian military's high command may sees no alternative. I'm sure they will do it with a great deal of reluctance. I mean, it will not be a choice. But they may have a little choice because Morsi's supporters are determined to engage in a struggle they see as a matter of life and death, and to use religion to incite fervor and anger among the supporters. However, I believe that it is unlikely that the army will resort to martial law unless the situation gets completely out of hand. Because until now, I think the army sees it as manageable. But this prolonged upheaval does not bode well for the future. And so I believe that today it is to the civil and secular forces to come up with new initiatives. And one of them is to stop any further incitement or demonization of the Muslim Brother and strive towards reconciliation instead. Because we know the military, as we all know, has no particular interest in democracy. So it falls upon the secular and civic political forces, and not the military, to help define a democratic and pluralistic Egypt. Of course, this will require unifying around one leadership and one program as to how to direct the transitional period and implement the agreed-upon roadmap. Because at the end of the day, it is they who must define the limits of the military's role in a new constitution. The civic forces, the secular forces, the revolutionaries need to guarantee that the transitional period towards a restoration of the civic order is as short as possible. And they need to stop demonizing the Muslim Brothers and try to work towards a reconciliation. It is up to them. Because I believe that today the ongoing upheaval has transcended Morsi and the presidency as a whole. It's now a struggle over the future of Egypt, the soul of Egypt, and the unity of the country.
Thank you so much. And just to remind you, our guest speaker was Mona Makram Abeid, Professor of Political Science at the American University in Cairo.
Well, I think there's a range of attitude and a range of responses that we've seen. Many are concerned about the bloodshed, about the violence. To quote, for example, the chairwoman of the African Union, Daima Zuna, who's been monitoring the events in Egypt, she said she was particularly concerned about the tension prevailing in the country and the risks that this situation poses to stability and security in Egypt, as well as to the consolidation of its democratic process, she said.
To me, it's a little bit puzzling that most states, most heads of the governments are not exactly against the ousting of a democratically elected leader, because Mr. Morsi has been elected in free and open election, which was recognized by all major international players. Now he's being ousted from power, and no supporters of democracy are really against this controversial fact.
I think this focus on the democratic process is something that many countries have picked up. For example, we hear from Barack Obama in the United States. He says that he firmly believes that the best foundation for lasting stability in Egypt is a democratic political order with participation from all sides. Similarly, from the United Kingdom, we hear Prime Minister David Cameron saying that although he never supports intervention by the military, the important thing is to focus on the future. What needs to happen now, he said, in Egypt is for democracy to flourish and for genuine democratic transition to take place.
And this vision is shared by our next guest speaker, Professor Tahrir One, acting vice president of the Giga Institute of Middle East Studies in Hamburg.
To what extent does the coming to power of the army in Egypt, how much will this help stabilize the situation in the country?
I mean, this, as everybody knows, they did it before when Mubarak was toppled for several months, and the experience was mixed. I mean, the military was criticized heavily. In the beginning, they were welcomed, but latest in August, they came under heavy critic, and I think they got the experience. It is not very helpful for them to rule directly. What they are looking for is a calm atmosphere for their business activities. They have really severe business activities. They are an active economic player, and what they are looking for is a civil government, a caretaker government to organize the next elections, not direct ruling.
But stability and order within the country is something that they would be interested in, that they are trying to bring about.
Yes, of course. I mean, this is their main interest, as before. I mean, there's not a real tradition of direct military ruling to connect with the Egyptian military. I mean, they have experience since 1952, and the presidents, including Mubarak, came from the military, but it is not a military dictatorship like in Latin America before, for example.
And is the army's idea of stability, or the business community's idea of stability, is this something that is very much the same as perhaps liberal and reformist groups, or do they have a different perspective about what stability and order in the country actually means?
I mean, as long as Egypt will get the chance, at least within the next 10 to 12 months, to get a new constitution and to get an atmosphere calm enough to organize elections, I think this is enough. And if the military, I think the military is the only institution in Egypt at the moment that can organize such kind of at least semi-stable conditions to organize elections and to organize the circumstances for writing a new constitution as a precondition for elections. I don't see any alternative to the military as an institution to guarantee that. You don't have a real party system. You don't have any other institution who can really organize that. This is the main problem they have at the moment.
So is there any idea that the military is doing this for their own ends, or is it really to try to build up a much wider sense of stability within the country?
The military as an institution doesn't have any real political interests. They have more or less only, I mean, in that terms, to speak in that terms, they have economic interests. We can say that roughly a quarter of Egyptian economy is under the control of the military. I mean, they have heavy interest in the infrastructure, even in the tourism sector. They have at least bakeries. I mean, they have everything. It's 25% roughly. So I mean, they want to create an atmosphere. They want to create a situation or a surrounding which can serve their economic interest best. And this is the main interest they have.
Sir, thank you so much. And just to remind you, that was Professor Dr. Tahrir One, Acting Vice President of the Giga Institute of Middle East Studies in Hamburg.
This is the Voice of Russia.
This is Burning Point, looking into the issue of the escalating violence in Egypt. I suppose that perhaps this is also a vision shared by the markets, because, to quote the Wall Street Journal, judging by Egypt's surging market and rebounding currency a day after the military ousted President Mohamed Morsi, investors believe that Cairo's new leadership will shore up confidence in the country's markets and open the way for new economic aid from Arab neighbors.
No, I think on the technical question of how Mr. Morsi has been removed from power, I think quite striking by its silence is the response from many countries. As we looked at earlier, there was a lot looking towards the future. And in fact, there were numerous positive responses, for example, taken by King Hamad bin Al-Asa al-Khalifa from the Kingdom of Bahrain. He wrote very quickly to the interim president, Adli Mansour, according to the Bahrain News, to say, "We are confident that you will take the responsibility to achieve the aspirations of the Egyptian people." So this is very much a positive view, saying that the action that has been taken is something in the name of the people. It is focusing perhaps more on the democratic will, the democratic motion of what has been done, rather than looking back towards the elections of Mr. Morsi a year ago.
Well, but just to quote the Wall Street Journal, they're saying that Mr. Morsi's ouster has been welcomed by neighboring oil and gas-rich Gulf countries at odds with the ousted leader's Muslim Brotherhood-led government. Saudi Arabia's King Abdullah was the first to congratulate Egypt's newly inaugurated interim president. The United Arab Emirates reached out with its blessings, saying that it had followed the events in its sisterly country of Egypt with appreciation and satisfaction. I would also like to quote a very interesting story which I found in the College Times, which is one of the leading publications in the region. And it is called Aftermath on the Nile. It's been written by Eric Margolis, who is a veteran U.S. journalist. Now, his basic idea is that joy over the Brotherhood's downfall may be premature. And just a short quote from that. He says, "The Obama White House, Congress, and the mainstream media are having difficulty concealing their glee over the military coup in Egypt. Officially, U.S. government spokesmen have tutted about the military takeover and pussyfooted around calling it a coup. Using the C word would activate a U.S. law calling for cutting off any U.S. aid to an armed force that overthrows a democratically elected government. So instead of stern action by Washington, we are inundated by pious double talk about democracy. In fact, the U.S. is very pleased," the article says, "to see the Morsi Muslim Brotherhood government kicked out of office. Even more pleased is Israel, which has used its potent influence in the U.S. to support the anti-Morsi coup. Egypt's 480,000-man armed forces are joined at the hip with the U.S. Pentagon. Most of its arms, spare parts, munitions, and intelligence comes from the U.S. Many senior and mid-ranking Egyptian officers have been trained in U.S. military institutions. Washington gives Egypt's military $1.5 billion per annum." End quote. And I suppose that only adds to the controversy surrounding the situation in Egypt now. Now, there's another country, which is Israel, which is neighboring Egypt, and which has a history of very special relations with Egypt, which also seems to be supporting the latest developments. And here I suggest we could listen to our next guest speaker, Dr. David Bukai, professor of political science at the University of Haifa.
In February 2011, the military headed by Tantawi had operated or executed an inner coup d'etat against Mubarak. They used the people in Tahrir Square as a pretext to change the power because they didn't want Mubarak inherit his rule to his son Gamal. In 2013, right now, what's going on in Egypt, that the military uses the mob, the people, to take power again, because they don't want Morsi, they don't want any other political regime. They want to bring back the military regime, and they did it. They headed now not by Tantawi, but by Assisi. But it's just normal what's going on in Egypt. It's very simple. The people are nothing important. I mean, they go out and they strike and they shout whatever they wish, but this is not, first of all, democracy. This is not the operation of democracy. It wasn't before. It's not now. It's very easy. Military coup d'etat by the Egyptian military to come back to power. The military brings one great word, which is order. You have order. So it has nothing to do with economy. This has nothing to do with what's happening in Egypt and other places. It's not the economy. It is political power. It is order. And the military can do it much better. So what's happened right now in Egypt is that the military using the population, those 20% of the population who are against the Muslim groups, and the military has really used them to go out to Tahrir Square and other places. Tahrir is a symbol, okay, in other places, so that the military can enter in, step in with the word, we bring the order, we want the will of the people, and the will of the people is order. We want to bring order and quiet and peaceful relationships among the Egyptian people. But this is pretext. This has nothing to do. It's just politics. The question is the military or the Islamic groups. And the military has a power because they have the weapon. And they use a weapon to bring order, their order, not the Islamic order.
Professor, thank you so much. And just to remind you, this time our guest speaker was Dr. David Bukai, Professor of Political Science at the University of Haifa in Israel. So it looks like our guest speakers, some of them at least, are saying that military means order.
And this is very much the traditional justification of a military coup, and where it is supported that to some extent civilian democratic rule has been perceived in the eyes of some to have broken down, and this is the justification to bring in the military. Often they have the authority, often they have the means to impose order that
and absolutely no bearing to a democratic process whatsoever. I know this is a beaten phrase, but those are the double standards. Really sorry to acknowledge that. No,
I mean, it's certainly very possible to imagine that in other circumstances, if other leaders, other countries had faced this situation, you could certainly imagine the response being very, very different, saying that this was an aggressive, hostile action taken against a democratically elected leader. So certainly, yes, I think in this case, it is right, and this.
But you know, I sorry for interrupting you, Ian, but I suppose that the recent events in the Middle East would rather demonstrate that most leading international players, let's put it that way, tend to oppose the democratically elected leaders, like Bashar al-Assad, for instance.
No, I mean this is something that has been seen in many cases, that where there has been some process, where there has been a democratic process, it is not always something that has been strictly honoured, or people find reasons to question this. And while we're on the subject of responses internationally, actually the one voice that I heard stating these similar sentiments was from Turkey. Turkey's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmet Davutoglu. He told reporters that it is not possible for any democratic country to comprehend nor to accept that an elected president is removed from office through undemocratic means other than by elections.
Well, you know, there is an explanation to that, because Turkey might be the next country where Muslim Brotherhood government would need to go. And now I suggest you might listen to our next guest speaker, Dr. Omar Ashur, the Director of Middle East Studies at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter in the UK.
I think it's quite a negative development, as we know from all of the cases where an elected institution is removed by force and this institution has some support on the ground. The consequences are usually quite negative, either some sort of a military dictatorship or a military-dominated political scene, or a civil war scenario like President Putin warned. I think it's a very, very dangerous situation. Egypt is 4.5 times the size of Syria. If the conditions escalated, I think we might see a situation similar to Syria, or a situation similar to Algeria in 1992. Right now, it's mostly the demonstrations that are supporting the president are mostly peaceful in their nature, but this cannot go on for a long time. We saw yesterday at or today at 3 a.m., an attack by the Presidential Guard on one of the sit-ins that is close to the Presidential Guard base. And right now the news is coming that it's a major massacre. 42 people have been killed, more than 300 have been injured. They were there with their families, so some of the teenagers and even children were injured. So it's a very, very dangerous situation. Obviously, the blood brings more blood, and the blood brings the mobilization brings the repression, and the repression brings the blood, and blood brings mobilization again. So it's a very vicious cycle, and the only way to end it is to have some sort of a referendum and to roll back from the coup, to release the president, because until now the president is held by the coup plotters. You know, there is no way to see this in a positive way, unfortunately, and it's quite sad because this was far, far below the expectations of the revolution of January 2011.
They seem to be promising to hold a new election. Is that correct? I mean, the military.
Yes, but they said they have a roadmap, but the roadmap is going in a very dangerous direction. The roadmap really annulled 5 nationwide elections that happened between March 2011 and December 2012. 2 national referendums on the Constitution, a constitutional declaration and a constitution, parliamentary elections, 2 of them for the upper house and the lower house, and the presidential elections. So overall 14 nationwide free and fair democratic rounds were annulled, the results were annulled, and now we're back to point zero. And they say they will have a roadmap, and the roadmap basically is suspending the constitution, dissolving the parliament, arresting the president and his presidential administration, and then now they shut his party headquarters, and starting a witch hunt of the members of his party, going after them. And then there are no dates. There is no clear dates on when is the next election, when is the next parliamentary election. And I think the situation is not, you cannot have a clear roadmap at the moment, because there is so much mobilization and so much polarization on the ground that no roadmap will hold in a week. After a week, everything may change. We saw also what's more dangerous is we saw some of the army men in the rallies supporting the president, saying that we are supporting the president and we do not agree with what the defense minister Sisi did. And this makes us think of the Chavez coup back in 2002, when the army split, and part of it was supportive and part of it was against Chavez, and they reinstated him back after a coup attempt. But again, I think in Egypt, it's very difficult because they will try to settle this by force, both sides. And I think this will cost a lot of bloodshed. And in the most dangerous scenario, we can see like a decade of bloodshed, like Algeria saw back in the 1990s.
Do we need to expect some kind of a ripple effect in other countries in the region?
It will definitely have ripple effects. I think all sides have regional allies. I think there will be several regional powers intervening in this if the conflicts escalate. And the map is very clear. I think you have countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE very much welcome the coup, welcome the change of or the removal of Morsi. And you have also allies of Morsi in places like Gaza, in Sudan, in Libya. So it's a very, very dangerous situation. Every side will be asking for his regional ally and his regional patron to help him out.
Dr. Ashur, thank you so much. And just to remind you, this time our guest speaker was Dr. Omar Ashur, the Director of the Middle East Studies at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter.